In May 2019, Kenny Rogers was dying in a Georgia hospital. His family thought it was the end. Then, Dolly Parton showed up with a secret plan. She smuggled in recording equipment and convinced Kenny to sing one last time. What happened next shocked everyone in that room. Kenny's voice cracked as he sang words that felt like a goodbye letter. The hospital tried to stop them, but Dolly wouldn't quit. That recording became the most heartbreaking song you'll never hear on the radio. Kenny Rogers was born on August 21, 1938, in a small hospital in Houston, Texas. His full name was Kenneth Donald Rogers, and he was the fourth of 8 kids. His family lived in a cramped 2-room unit inside a government housing project called San Felipe Courts. Money was always short. Some nights, dinner was just peanut butter on bread. In the 1940s, his father's best paycheck was $75 a week, and that barely covered rent and food. But Kenny didn't sit still. He cleaned floors in a hat store for $9 a week. He carried plates at the Rice Hotel. That's how he saved $60 to buy a guitar from Sears. Growing up poor made him hungry for more. And by the time he was 17, he became the first person in his family to finish high school. Years later, he remembered that moment on national TV. In high school, he and a few friends formed a band and gave themselves a bold name, the Scholars. It was funny because none of them got great grades, but they had something else: rhythm, charm, and drive. They played local dances and veterans' halls, mixing doo-wop with a little Elvis flair. They even recorded a song called Poor Little Doggy and sold 3,000 copies just around Houston. The song caught the ears of a local TV show, and soon he was performing on Jivetown. In the fall of 1957, Kenny went into a recording studio in Houston and made a song called That Crazy Feeling. He was just 19. The small label that printed it didn't expect much, but the record took off. 30,000 copies sold in Texas in just over 2 months. It reached number 3 on local charts. That success got national attention, and before long, Dick Clark invited him to perform on American Bandstand. On February 15, 1958, America saw Kenny Rogers for the first time on national television, dressed in a powder blue jacket, singing his heart out. The song never climbed higher than 51 on the national chart, but it didn't matter. The camera loved him. But before the fame, before the country ballads and movies, there was a kid in love. On May 15, 1958, just 3 months after That Crazy Feeling came out, 19-year-old Kenny married Janice Gordon in a quiet Houston courthouse. She was 18 and already 3 months pregnant. Kenny didn't have much. He borrowed $75 for the license and wore his only suit to the ceremony before heading to his shift at the carpet warehouse. By September 15th, their daughter, Carol Lynn, was born. Kenny's entire net worth back then was a pawned trumpet, and a beat-up Oldsmobile, he said, was worth more than the wedding. But he was determined. He mapped club gigs on scraps of paper and squeezed in $15 performances between diaper changes and factory shifts. It was messy and exhausting, but it showed how hard he was willing to fight for both his family and his dream. Not everyone believed in him. Janice's parents thought he was dragging their daughter down. In his 2012 memoir, Kenny said they were convinced he'd ruined her life. Her mother circled job ads at breakfast and gave them to Kenny while he scribbled guitar notes. That Christmas in 1958, they gave the couple only one gift: a framed photo of Kenny's band. But her parents wouldn't even hang it on the wall. They said if he couldn't promise a steady paycheck within a year, he should let Janice come home. Kenny tried to smile through it, but each family dinner felt like an interview he couldn't pass. It wore him down, and it wore down the marriage. By October 1959, everything came crashing down. Their daughter was 6 months old. One night, during a fight, Kenny stepped out to cool off. When he came back, Janice and her mother were gone. Every blanket, every toy, packed and taken. They filed for divorce, and by April 1960, it was over. Just 686 days after their wedding, the marriage ended. Kenny was already touring with the Bobby Doyle Trio by then, playing 6 nights a week, earning $55 a gig, and spending most of it on motel rooms. Years later, he told Fox News, "Music became my mistress," and the mistress won. In 1961, Janice remarried. Her new husband had a regular job and a stable home in Dallas. Kenny didn't. He was still chasing stages. and living on the road. So he made a difficult choice. He agreed in writing to step back, to only see his daughter once a week for 2 hours. I would be her father, he said, but he would be her dad. He tried to make it work, but by the end of the year, his schedule had already made him miss 42 of the 52 visits. He stepped away completely. It broke his heart, but he thought it was the only fair thing to do. By 1980, Kenny Rogers was selling out arenas across the world. People sang along to The Gambler and Lady, but there was one note that never left him. He hadn't seen his daughter in 15 years. He tried to fix it. He flew her and Janice to Hawaii, hoping for a reunion. But the week ended in silence and awkward stares. It didn't work. In 2012, he spoke the truth out loud. I chose career over my first child, and that's a debt I can't repay. 3 years later, on his final tour, he stood in front of 12,000 people in Atlanta and stopped mid-song. He said success had taken things money couldn't replace, things like teaching his daughter to ride a bike. And in that moment, everyone understood what he really meant when he sang about gamblers and chances. However, Kenny Rogers didn't walk into fame as the bearded gambler everyone remembers. When he showed up to a rehearsal in Los Angeles on May 3, 1966, he was just 27 years old, carrying a stand-up bass and coming from small-time jazz gigs. That day, he joined the New Christie Minstrels, a well-known folk group with 30 members. They had already won a Grammy and sold over 5 million records. Kenny had been earning $50 a night playing in Houston clubs, but now he was stepping into a world of national TV shows pulling in 20 million viewers. With the spotlight came rules. He had to shave his beard and wear a green blazer with the group's name stitched on it. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Their album sales jumped 12%, and their 1966 Christmas album made it to number 73 on the Billboard 200, their best debut in 2 years. Less than a year later, by March 1967, Kenny and 4 other minstrels had enough. They were tired of being told what to sing and never seeing the money. On April 10th, they quit together and found a cheap studio in Hollywood for $28 a night. They called themselves the First Edition. Kenny changed his look. He grew his hair, pierced his ear, and poured all his savings, about $8,000, into new gear. Within 6 weeks, Reprise Records signed them. It wasn't a big deal money-wise. They only got $15,000, but what mattered was the freedom. In just 36 hours, they recorded 8 songs, more than he'd been allowed to do in an entire year with the Minstrels. On October 10, 1967, they recorded a wild, fuzzy track called Just Dropped In. Glenn Campbell quietly played the intro. When it hit the radio in January 1968, it exploded. By February 17th, it reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. The lyrics sounded like a trippy dream, but they were actually warning about LSD. The song still sold nearly 2 million copies in just 4 months. Soldiers in Vietnam played it on jukeboxes, and it even got the band a spot on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. The censors muted the word psychedelic, but it didn't matter. Kenny had arrived. By May 1969, promoters were already advertising concerts just using Kenny's name. The record label leaned into it. Their 4th album came out under Kenny Rogers and the First Edition. That slight change did a lot. Kenny's cut from songwriting doubled to 50%, and his pay for live shows jumped to $2,500. It settled some backstage arguments about who got the spotlight, though it also hinted that he might go solo one day. Ironically, the first hit under the new name wasn't even sung by Kenny. Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town, featured guitarist Terry Williams on vocals. Still, it hit number 6 and sold 2 million copies. The rebranding worked, no matter who was singing. In 1971, instead of chasing talk show appearances like other bands, the First Edition got their own show. Inside a Toronto studio, they built a fake Mississippi riverboat set. The show was called Rollin' on the River and started on September 18, 1971. It aired on 163 stations, more than The Ed Sullivan Show ever had. Every Saturday evening, Kenny welcomed guests like B.B. King and Cheech and Chong, then played with them under the steam stacks. In its first season, the show averaged 7.2 million viewers, even beating out the Partridge Family in some cities. By 1972, they had to shrink the show to 30 minutes, but it still featured 48 acts and used over a ton of dry ice. The show ended in 1973. Kenny was already thinking about going solo, but he had done something rare. He had a psychedelic rock hit and a TV variety show before his 35th birthday. Now the personal side, Kenny's second marriage didn't last long. On October 3, 1960, he married Jean at a church in Houston. They were out before lunchtime, but by that same night, things already felt wrong. Kenny later said they both realized within 48 hours that it was a mistake. Still, they stayed together because he was suddenly famous, and managers thought being married made him more marketable. The show had to go on. It ended quietly on April 24, 1963. They didn't argue about money or houses. The only thing they fought over was a tiny black and white TV, 13 inches wide. Jean got it. By summer that year, Kenny was living in a cheap motel in Los Angeles, writing bass parts for songs like Just Dropped In. That quick divorce set the tone for everything that came later. Just 6 months after the papers were signed, he married again for the third time. On October 15, 1963, he wed Margot Anderson, a 23-year-old socialite from Texas. She was already pregnant, and their son, Kenneth Ray Rogers Jr., was born on May 24, 1964. Kenny was hardly around. In 1964 alone, he was on the road 280 nights, while Reuben James climbed the charts. Years later, in a 1978 interview, Kenny said he saw his baby boy only 9 days during those first 6 months. He sent Polaroids instead of hugs. Margot wasn't happy. She kept every diaper receipt and sent them to his tour accountant. Just to make a point, 1 month alone cost her over $400. Kenny kept those receipts and mentioned them in his memoirs, proof of a family stretched to the breaking point. By 1975, the first edition had broken up, and Kenny was going solo. His song Lucille was starting to take off, and that year he played 210 shows. Margot filed for divorce in April. She told the court that his constant absence caused extreme emotional stress. Official records showed Kenny had only been home 16 nights in the first 4 months of that year. That's one home night for every 88 he spent on stage. The divorce went through on July 15, 1975. Margot got the house, a Buick, and $60,000 cash. That might seem small today, but back then, it was a lot. Then came Marianne Gordon. She met him on the set of Hee Haw, wearing her actress smile and carrying the kind of quiet charm that could catch even Kenny Rogers off guard. On October 1, 1977, she became his fourth wife. The timing was almost surreal. Just 5 months before The Gambler would shoot to #1 and turn Rogers into a legend. For the first time, both halves of the marriage were celebrities, but their lives quickly split into different orbits. She was filming Look What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby, while he was out playing more than 100 shows a year and building a 1,200-acre dream estate in Georgia with a private golf course. On November 15, 1978, Kenny released a 3-minute track called The Gambler. He thought it might do well on country radio, but what happened next was unreal. It shot to #1 on the country chart, hit #3 on the adult contemporary list, and even broke into the top 20 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song carried Kenny all the way to the 22nd Annual Grammy Awards and won Best Male Country Vocal Performance in 1980. The song's wisdom is packed into just 271 words, and of all those words, the one repeated the most was no. But it wasn't just the single that took off. A week before Thanksgiving 1978, the Gambler album dropped, and it hit even harder. It flew to #1 on the country albums chart and climbed all the way to #12 on the Billboard 200. Few country records had made that leap. By 1983, it had sold over 4 million copies in the U.S. alone. Then something unexpected happened. On April 8, 1980, CBS aired a made-for-TV movie called Kenny Rogers as The Gambler. No one was sure what to expect, but the movie turned into a huge hit. It won an Eddie Award for editing, earned Emmy nominations, and convinced CBS to keep going. The sequels came in 1983, 1987, 1991, and 1994. Each one picked up where the last left off, turning that short 3-minute song into a 9-hour Western saga. By 1994, it had become a full-on TV franchise, and it worked. One of the sequels even became the highest-rated Western of the season, with Rogers starring alongside Bruce Boxleitner. And then came Dolly. On August 19, 1983, Kenny and Dolly released Islands in the Stream, written by the Bee Gees. 7 weeks later, it hit #1 #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, knocking off Total Eclipse of the Heart. At the same time, it topped the country and adult contemporary charts, making them the first country duo to hold all 3 spots since Glenn Campbell back in 1968. The single moved fast, over 4,000 radio spins in its first week, and by Christmas, it had sold 2 million copies. In 2023, the RIAA updated its numbers. Islands in the Stream is now triple platinum, with over 3 million certified units sold. But for all their fame, Kenny and Dolly only officially recorded 5 duets over 30 years. Just 5. Islands in the Stream came first in 1983, followed by Love is Strange, Real Love, Christmas Without You, and finally, You Can't Make Old Friends in 2013. That last one would be their goodbye. But what they lacked in quantity, they made up for in impact. 3 of the 5 hit #1 on the country chart. One became a pop phenomenon. Another landed a Grammy nomination in 2014. Kenny liked to say their stats were better than baseball legend Ted Williams. He wasn't wrong. Fans always wanted to see romance between them, but that was never the deal. Dolly once called Kenny the only man I've ever seen who makes white hair sexy, but behind the scenes, they acted more like siblings. He was like a big brother to me, she said in 2014. Kenny said it too. They flirted for decades, but deliberately kept things platonic. There were even jokes on tour. Venue managers placed bets on which city's crowd would finally get to see them kiss. It never happened. That restraint became part of the magic. Then came the song that changed everything. You Can't Make Old Friends. On July 2nd in 2013, they reunited in Nashville to record it. Rogers was 74. As they sang the line, "What will I do when you are gone?" the studio fell quiet. The sound engineer remembered people wiping tears before the first verse was even over. Rogers himself had to stop recording more than once to pull himself together. The song only reached number 57 on the charts, but none of that mattered. Its music video reached 1 million views in 10 days, astonishing for a pair whose average fan was already in their 50s. Sometimes it's not about chart numbers, it's about truth. Then there was her 5th marriage. It all started in 1992 inside a quiet Italian restaurant in Atlanta. Kenny Rogers was on a blind date, but he couldn't stop staring at the 26-year-old waitress across the room. Her name was Wanda Miller. He didn't pay attention to the woman he was supposed to be with. He just watched Wanda. When the evening ended, he left his phone number for her, but she threw it away. Still, something about him made her curious. She eventually called back. That one phone call turned into 5 years of getting to know each other. Wanda's parents weren't easy to convince, especially since they were actually 2 years younger than Kenny. But slowly, he earned their trust. On June 1st, 1997, Kenny and Wanda got married at his massive 1,000-acre ranch in Athens. He was 59 then, and he made a promise: no more 200 shows a year. He cut back, performing less than 50 times annually, just to make room for something new in his life. That something came in 2004. On July 6th, at the age of 65, Kenny Rogers became a father again. Wanda, who was 34 years younger than him, gave birth to twin boys. Justin Charles came out weighing 6 pounds 10 ounces, and Jordan Edward was 5 pounds 8. It happened in Atlanta, and for Kenny, everything changed overnight. He already had 3 grown-up children, but having newborn twins at his age made him rethink everything. He stopped chasing tours. Saturdays were no longer for arenas or interviews. They were now Super Saturday. Breakfast at McDonald's, silly car wash races, hours at Chuck E. Cheese, and endless backyard games. He even built a real miniature train just for them. He wanted the boys to know that with him, family came first. Friends teased him, saying the gambler had traded cards for peekaboo. But Kenny wasn't joking when he said time was ticking fast. He wanted to pack 20 years of memories into 10. And by 2025, when the twins turned 21, they still kept Super Saturday alive in his memory. They were tall, over 6 feet, bearded like their dad, and still honoring the childhood he gave them. In May 2019, the world grew worried. Kenny was rushed to a hospital in Georgia for what his team called severe dehydration. He was 80, but the media went wild. Rumors flew that he was dying, that he'd called Dolly Parton to say goodbye, that hospice care was already set. His spokesperson called all of it wild misinformation, though they admitted Kenny would be staying in the hospital for a while to recover. What no one knew then was how much pain he had been hiding. Arthritis twisted his knees. A back surgery from years ago still gave him problems. His cholesterol had been a struggle for decades. In 2014, he'd undergone surgery for a dangerous condition in his intestines. Now doctors feared it was back. They kept him under close watch for 2 weeks. Outside the hospital, fans gathered with signs that read, "Stick around, Kenny." He even sent out a video, smiling and saying, "Dehydrated, yes. Fold in my cards, not today." But people close to him admitted quietly that this was the most serious health scare since his heart procedure in 2011. Just a year earlier, in April 2018, he had shocked fans by canceling the last 8 shows of his farewell tour. It had been called The Gambler's Last Deal, and he'd taken it around the world. 200 shows across 5 continents. But at 79, his body wasn't keeping up. He had a dizzy spell on stage, and after that, doctors told him to stop. He listened. He didn't want to walk out and have to say sorry. Shows in places like North Carolina and London were canceled overnight. Stagecoach Festival had to erase his name from their posters. He didn't even get to sing one last song with Dolly Parton like he had hoped. It was the first time in 6 decades that he didn't finish a tour. His final concert count? 5,003 performances. He'd kept track of every one of them in a leather notebook since 1957. Then, 1 week after his death, the world heard a song they'd never heard before. It was called Goodbye. It had been written years earlier by Lionel Richie and recorded quietly in 2009. It was never released, just sitting there, waiting. Until March 27, 2020, a simple guitar. Kenny's voice sounding softer, a little shakier. The first words he sang were, "No more kisses, no more I love yous." It felt like a final letter. The chorus whispered, "There's peace in where you are, maybe all I need to know." Lionel later shared that he'd written it in 1981 after watching Kenny pray backstage. He always knew the song would find its moment, and it did. In just 2 days, Goodbye was played 2.3 million times on Spotify, more than any song of Kenny's in a single week. Critics said it was his version of My Way, the perfect goodbye without knowing it would be. At 10:25 p.m. on March 20th, 2020, Kenny Rogers passed away. He was 81 and at home in Sandy Springs, Georgia. Wanda was there. So were the twins, his 3 older children too. One nurse later said his last words were to his grandson Kyle on a FaceTime call. He told him, "Be kind, stick together." Because of COVID-19, there couldn't be a big public funeral, but places across the country turned off their lights for him. The Grand Ole Opry went dark. The Astrodome in Houston did too. Even Las Vegas played the lyrics of Lady across its neon sky. On March 25th, there was a small private service. His ashes were placed in a cedar urn that he had carved himself. It had a joker on one side and a stack of poker chips on the other. Wanda said he didn't want a grave. He just wanted Islands in the Stream to be played loud enough so heaven could hear. In the end, he'd sold 120 million records, won 3 Grammys, and left behind 5 children. His youngest was 16. His oldest was 66. The Gambler was finally done playing, but his music and those Super Saturdays never stopped. Back in 2013, when Kenny was 75, he finally got the call he had waited decades for. The Country Music Hall of Fame was inducting him. It happened on October 27th in Nashville. Garth Brooks and Barry Gibb stood beside him. Everyone thought it had taken too long. He already had a diamond album, 3 Grammys, and had been honored at the Kennedy Center. Why did the hall wait until year 55 of his career? Kenny joked that it gave him time to bring his twin boys, who were 8 then. He got emotional when they touched the bronze plaque with his name on it. That night also marked something unusual. Kenny was now the only artist ever inducted into both the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Gaming Hall of Fame, thanks to his Las Vegas Gambler show. Very few people in the hall had ever reached #1 on the pop charts, but Kenny had done it twice. Once with Lady and once with Islands in the Stream. He had gone far beyond country. They couldn't ignore him anymore. Over the course of 46 years, Kenny became a father 5 times, each child living a completely different kind of life. His first daughter, Carol Lynn, was born in 1958. She was raised quietly under another man's name after Kenny gave up custody as a teenager. She grew up to be a psychology teacher in Georgia. She's only ever given one interview. Kenny Rogers Jr. came next in 1964. He tried acting, appeared in shows like MacGyver, and later started a production company for faith-based films. In 1981, Christopher was born. He wanted nothing to do with show business. Instead, he fixes old Airstream trailers in Tennessee. Then came the twins in 2004. At their high school graduation in 2023, both boys wore purple gowns. Justin wanted to study audio engineering. Jordan dreamed of being a marine biologist, saying he wanted to protect the oceans his dad once sailed during tours. Kenny had once said he'd never force his kids into the spotlight. He meant it. They all walked their own paths.